and welcome to a new video. Today it's a kind of a different video. I want to talk about what are, at least in my opinion, the best decks in Edison format, what decks I would play if I wanted to top tournaments. Yeah, these are kind of just a breakdown of the deck, what the deck does, what each deck is good at. And some of this may be fairly intuitive to more experienced Edison format players, but I think for a lot of new players, this is something that could be of value. Yeah, I'm happy to hear also in your comments, you know, what you think about kind of this list, and if you have any other suggestions, any other decks which you think are better or worse for any reasons. I want to start with an honorable mention. I'm going to be very specific in this video. I want to really talk about the top decks. I'm not going to talk about possible decks like Zombies or Dragon Turbo, which are kind of good, maybe Tier 2 decks, or Gladiator Beast, which I don't think are top decks right now. I want to talk about the decks which I think have the highest probability of winning or topping at a tournament, and the reasons why I think these decks are so strong. So one honorable mention is Forgs. Now this deck is extremely powerful. You see the list here. I think this is probably so a lot of people think that this deck is the strongest deck. It is basically a combo deck. It has a really strong frog synergies, Substitute, you know, basically being able to go through the deck, having a lot of card advantage options with Moray of Greed, Salvage, Pot of Avarice, basically having an infinite kind of amount of card advantage with Substitute and all the frog groups you can do, and basically having a really strong basically combo finish where you make Armory Arm and Colossal Fighter, and you equip the Armory Arm to the opponent's monster, and then with the Colossal Fighter you keep crashing into it. You keep basically crashing your Colossal Fighter into it until they take all the damage. And so, I mean, that's kind of what the deck does. It's really strong with this Fishborg Master. And why I think this is a very strong deck, but why I think this is an honorable mention, because this deck is extremely complicated to pilot. Of course, you can master it if you get experience, if you play with it for a while. But frankly, I think the other decks in this list are a better choice, especially if you're a beginner. But just if you want to kind of have fun and win at the same time, this deck probably can guarantee you a good number of wins. It has a good backup ran. Basically, you see all the traps in the sideboard. This is kind of the backup ran this deck has. It has basically becomes more of kind of less a combo version, more of a control version. But I just think you need to learn the sequencing, you need to learn the combo, the kind of the various lines in and out, and I think that gets, and the combo is very repetitive, to be honest. It's not it's not the most fun deck to play, and it's not the most fun deck to play against. So this is why I don't think this is a top deck for you, simply from the point of view of it's not a deck that's accessible to everybody. You need to really master the deck. You need to really know it really well. And that's true for a lot of decks. But in this particular case, I think you can win just as easily or basically at the same rate with a much simpler deck to pilot. So this is why Force is an honorable mention. Moving on to kind of the actual list, and I'm going to talk about the top 3 decks. I know this is kind of the top 3 that everybody kind of talks about as the top decks in Edison format, but I'll explain specifically what each deck is very good at. So starting with kind of the Hero Frog deck. This is a very strong deck for a couple reasons. It has the strong Frog engine with Substitute. This card is absolutely insane, just being able to continuously summon frogs from the deck. You can do the loop turn 1 with Sword Exchange or with something like a Brain Control going second. You can do the loop with 1-for-1 and summoning another monster. You can do a lot of things, and basically the idea is that if you do this loop, your probability of winning is extremely strong. First of all, because some decks don't have easy outs to the dupe proc. But second of all, because you basically trim your deck of all the frogs, all the fat. You have 3 Borns engraved that will keep coming back for the rest of the game unless they're banished in some way. And basically the rest of your deck is all Monarchs and Miracle Fusions and basically strong cards, basically good top decks. So that's, I think, what makes this deck quite strong. One of kind of the weaknesses of this deck is one, it's not always super consistent, because if you draw the wrong frogs, or for example, if you only draw frogs and no monarchs, or only monarchs and no way to get you to set up 3-board, it can become inconsistent. Sometimes you can draw Miracle Fusion and have no heroes, or any kind of situation like that. So that's why I think a deck like this needs something like an Upstart, because it is not the most consistent deck. It's still quite consistent because you have many ways to get to the swap by searching it with dupe, and the swap gets you 3-board. So even if 3-board gets banished by DD Crow, it's still kind of it can still function. And the other part of it is that it doesn't have the most interaction, because it's a 3-board deck. You can't have so many traps. Some people play even less traps in this. So you generally only have Regeki Break, MST, Torrential, and Dash Shoot set. You don't really have any other kind of interactive cards. And so that's something that's a bit of can become sometimes an issue with the deck, because oftentimes it has very strong card advantage, but it gets killed by a deck like Blackwings too quickly, and so then it can't quite basically do what it wants to do. The hero package, I think, adds a lot of very strong things to this deck, basically having an ability to play cards like Absolute Zero basically for free with a Miracle Fusion is very strong. Having cards like the Stratos that can become later in the game an MST, having basically the heroes which are a secondary game plan. If you don't have the Frog Engine, you can start beating down with the heroes. I think this is kind of makes this deck quite strong. The other part of it, I would say, having access to some cards like Super Pole, having access to some other Monarch kind of cards, like some strong monsters that are difficult to out for some decks. Makes it strong. Another weakness though is that it can be susceptible to deck devastation virus, to graveyard hate, but it's not, even in that situation, it's not the end of the world, because first of all, it has a lot of outs to cards like Oppression, which are also strong against this deck, especially against the Substitute combo, and it does have outs against basically a lot of the things that the decks can do to stop it. The deck devastation virus is strong if you can do it before they assemble your combo. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Like siding DDD against this deck, I think going second is risky to have DDD in the deck, because they, first of all, if they do the combo, they have very few targets left in deck. That basically, if once they get rid of all the frogs, they only have maybe they leave one swap in deck. Maybe they don't even do that if they know you're playing DDD. Then they basically have 4 targets, the Junk Synchron and the 2 heroes. So, it's a deck that's not so easy to side against. And it does have access also some powerful side deck cards like the Spiritual Water Art, which can basically be a free tribute with 3-bone frog. So it's something to think about. I've played this before. I've played against it a lot of times. It's definitely a strong choice in my opinion, of the top 3 decks in the format. Moving on to Blackwings. This is an extremely strong deck for a few reasons. First of all, and this is something that other players have mentioned before, is it's an archetype type of deck. It's basically the only archetype deck in Edison format, together with Lightsworns and Gladiator Beasts and kind of similar decks, but that are not quite as powerful as this one, or not quite as consistent. It's very consistent. It does have some bricky hands. That's one weakness. For example, drawing the small monsters like the Blizzards and the Karuts without having some of the stronger monsters like the Siroccos and the Shuras. It can draw Vayu at the wrong time. It does have some small inconsistencies, but it has access to some auto wins, like just some cards which are extremely strong, like Whirlwind, Icarus Attack. It has access to a lot of traps, a lot of interaction. It has access to basically an attack protection like Karut. It has ways to play around the back road basically with Icarus. So if, for example, something like Ashura gets bottomless, if they have Icarus, they can tribute it and get a plus. So it's just a very strong deck overall. It can play Dark Arm, it can side DVDV, so it has a lot of tools which, for example, frogs don't have. And yeah, overall, it's just a very strong deck. The fact that it's an archetype makes it even stronger because you have access to basically a constant search with Blackwing. If this deck starts with this card and goes first, is the probability of winning is extremely high because it will just, unless there's an immediate out, it will just be a continuous +1. It has cards which are strong in the late game, like a Blizzard, which is basically searchable with any other monster except a Vayu. It has cards which can basically kill you out of nowhere. For example, doing a Sirocco and Bora, or basically putting together other monsters with Sirocco can basically kill you out of nowhere. So it's a kind of a combo deck, not the combo deck, like an aggressive deck, but that also has a lot of interaction. It also has a lot of strong kind of value cards. And it's just very difficult to play against, because when you play against it, you have to keep in mind both Icarus attack, Carrot, and kind of different plays they can do. Lots of traps you have to play around. On top of that, you're not sure if they have set the Icarus, or if you attack the monster, if you're safe to attack it because they could have a Carrot in the hand. So it's always something that it adds an extra level of complexity when playing against this deck. And on top of that, it has, as I mentioned, some of the strongest side deck options in the format, like Royal Oppression, like the Deck Devastation Virus, and on top of that, it can also have some, so it could drop strong cards like Dark Armed on you at any moment, and yeah. So I think this is just a very solid choice, very consistent, and I think a deck like this, here you don't see it in this list, needs cards like Upstart and like Legacy to get to the Black Whirlwind. I think if you get to this card, and if your opponent doesn't have an out to it, you're basically far ahead from the get-go. And then finally, the last deck I'll talk about is Vayu Turbo. This is the deck so far you've seen me play the most on the channel. This is the deck I usually play for a few reasons. One, I just think this deck is more fun than Blackwings and then Frogs, because I feel a lot of the things you do in the other decks are quite repetitive. Yes, you do some repetitive things also with Vayu, for example, Greffo, Sirocco, Vayu, and so on. But I think it's not quite the same. And in this deck, it's not, it's not like a archetype deck. It's kind of a mix of very strong cards. I think this deck is, out of the three, is probably the most consistent, because you have so many ways to get to your Greffo, so many ways to get to the Vayu and Sirocco engrave. You have, even in your not so good hands, you have a lot of cards which do a lot of things on their own. For example, a card like Gorz, or a card like Cross Sorcerer or Dark Arm is just a very strong card on its own. So this deck top decks quite well. Even top decking Armageddon Knight can be strong, because you can send Vayu and you can make a big monster. This is the list I am playing. Most lists don't play Icarus, don't play Lyra. They play different versions. One weakness of this deck going second is if you play too many Rykos, and I've talked about this before, it can become very slow. And this is why I only play two, and I don't play the Hamster. I think it just, going second is too slow. Going first is fine, but the games you lose with this deck often are the games where you draw too many of your slow kind of Ryko cards. That's why I play something like Lyra. It's a bit faster. I can basically be a bait for back row. I can destroy Future Fusion, Oppression, things like that, and also can mill you basically in the end phase, which is sometimes important. Because when you have a Raikou, you don't know if it's going to get Kairos or if it's going to survive. And on top of that, I mean, I play Icarus. Most people don't, but I just think like this is such a strong card in a lot of situations. For example, responding to the opponent's, basically having out to anything your opponent can do, and being able to play it pretty much on any time. It can recycle kind of some dead hands like with Vayu. One weakness of this deck is that kind of the main play you do at the beginning, for example, Greffer into Armed Wing is only kind of your biggest monster is only 23 attack, so having cards like Icarus can make the Armed Wing kind of more useful. And yeah, and overall, I really like this deck. I like the way it plays. I like the fact that it has a good amount of back row, not as heavy as Blackwing. It has a good amount of interaction. It has some very broken hands. This is something I like about this deck, is the ability to just draw some hands where you have Dark Armed, Grepher, and Dark Monsters, and sometimes you can just auto-win because you just drop Dark Armed on second turn. I think this is the best Dark Armed deck because you have so many ways to manipulate the graveyard by banishing with Vayu or with Necro or with Plague Spreader. You have a lot of ways to filling up the graveyard with the various Lightsworn cards on top of the Armageddon and the Greffers. I think just overall, in terms of consistency, this is the deck I would play. It has, being a dark, mostly dark deck, it has outs and access to a lot of cards which other decks don't. For example, Deck Devastation Virus. This is such a strong card in a lot of matchups. But also doesn't get hurt by cards like Oppression so much. So it's a deck that is, I think, somewhere in between, meaning it's quite aggressive, but it's still consistent. And I think this is why I personally prefer this deck. But I think you can easily top a tournament, or you can do well at a tournament, especially a local tournament with any of the 3 decks I showed. I hope you liked this video. I hope you kind of got some insight from it. I would love to hear your ideas, your comments, and exchange kind of some of your opinions on what you think the best deck in Edison format is.